HCC psychology class. It's your instructor, Cindy Kramer-Sledge, and I am covering part 2 of chapter 10, which talks about social development for infants and goes into some other things. So here is the PowerPoint. We have infants here. Social development for infant talks about babies and how they fit into their environment when they're born. How do they develop and fit into the world? So a couple of issues that come up. First of all, stranger anxiety, which is anxiety towards strangers. Usually develops about 8 months, and most kids outgrow it. It's completely typical, completely normal. Just because mom or dad is friends with someone doesn't mean that the infant will be as well. So they kind of develop some anxiety or apprehension about people they don't know. Again, they do outgrow this, and it's not necessarily a bad thing. What's more of an issue is your separation anxiety. And this is when you see fear, you see crying, and it's usually towards the caregiver. Whoever takes care of the child the most will be the one who suffers from the separation anxiety with the child. You typically see this in daycare settings when you drop a child, when a mom or a dad drops a child off for daycare and they leave to go to work. The child freaks out, starts crying, can't function without the mom or dad there. Now, most daycare facilities are trained to handle this situation and are trained to deal with this. But if you're a parent and your child is not in daycare, and you want to go out and you have a babysitter and your child is screaming and crying and grabbing onto your leg, what do you do in that situation? Well, if you're thinking that you might just sneak out the back door, that is the absolute worst thing that you could do. The worst thing, although I know lots of parents do it. It makes the parent feel better. The child's distracted, they won't notice, I'm just going to leave. Well, when the child does notice, and they always notice, they panic and they learn that you could disappear at any time. And it actually makes the separation anxiety even worse. The underlying issue with separation anxiety is trust. It is all about trust. And if you have a child suffering from separation anxiety, it means they don't trust the parent. They need to do something to reassure the child to get them to trust them. So here's how you handle it. You have a screaming, crying child. You leave. You just leave. You reassure the child. You tell them you'll be back, and then you go. And if it's a daycare situation or a situation where they're awake when you come back, you can tell them, look, mommy's back. I said I would come back, and here I am. I'm back. Almost like an I told you so. And maybe you need to do that for a week, a month, 6 months. But what you're doing is establishing trust with your child. And you'll eventually start to see the separation anxiety disappear, hopefully. If you all have any questions about that or are dealing with this issue, please come speak to me because I have so much more I could tell you about the situation. Also, throughout this PowerPoint, if you have any questions about anything I talk about, just keep a sheet of paper, write down your questions, and when I see you on Thursday, we can address all of your questions. Okay? Moving on now to attachment. This is a major issue that infants experience when they're born. Attachment is the close emotional bonds of affection that develop between infants and their caregivers. Another word for this is love. Attachment bonds, emotional bonds, showing a child that you love them. It is imperative that a child forms some bond, some attachment bond with an adult in the first year of their life. Usually it's mom, but it doesn't have to be. It can be dad, it can be a grandparent. It's the primary caregiver, whoever is going to be meeting the child's needs. It's very important. Children who do not have an attachment bond in the first couple of years of their life do not develop as well as they could have. And when you don't develop real well, this leads to other things. Kids will shut down. Intellectually, they'll shut down. Their immune system will not develop as it should be. I mean, lots of things happen. This attachment is so crucial to development. So very crucial. Now, back in the 70s, we used to think, 70s and before that, we used to think that this attachment bond happened because of food. Whoever was feeding the child was the person who would have the attachment bond with the child. Well, Harry Harlow did some studies on attachment using monkeys, and he said, you know what? I don't think it's about the food. I think it's about something else. I think it's about the touch, the physical touch, which is a biological need of all of us. Right? One of our basic primitive needs, it's a sexual need. And what that means is it's a need to be touched, a need to be physical with someone else. And babies need that in order to thrive, in order to develop. So that means they need to be held, they need to be touched, they need skin on skin. And if you think about the ways we feed infants, we hold them, we touch them, we look at them, we really try to make a connection beyond just the food. So what Harry did was he took a bunch of monkeys and he took them out of their natural habitat. He removed them from their biological mommy monkeys and he put them in a makeshift monkey community with these two surrogate mommy monkeys. And you'll notice this one over here is very prickly. Wires, right? Wires, and not really a monkey happy looking face. Kind of looks like a Ku Klux Klan face, right? Not really very friendly. But you'll notice there's a bottle here with food. The other surrogate monkey mommy has a terry cloth towel wrapped around it, make it a little bit more cuddly, and more of a monkey looking face. So these monkeys were placed into a community with these two mommies, and who do you think the monkeys preferred more? Well, it was this monkey over here, the one with the, where's my little pointer? Here we go. This monkey who was soft and cuddly and friendly looking. This one, if the monkeys got real hungry every now and then, they would go over there and take some food from this one, but they definitely did not cuddle. They did not form any kind of bond with this one. They always used this one. So let's go back one. You see this monkey sucking his thumb, cuddling with mommy. So it really wasn't about the food. And this was the first study that said, you know what? I think that cuddling, that touching, that affection is just as important as the food. Just as important. It is a major, major need for babies, for baby monkeys, for development. Okay? But if you take a look at that monkey and its mommy, is that mommy cuddling that monkey back? Is she really giving anything to the monkey? She's not. The monkey is doing all the work. It's a very one-sided relationship. Now, do you think that will matter later on in life, in the monkey's life, when they get reintroduced into the monkey community? Well, it certainly did in this case. When these monkeys were put back in with their cousins and their friends and all the other monkeys, they became very aggressive. They were very strange about touch. It's almost as if they were comfortable doing the touching, but if you tried to touch them, they would push you away, and it was very strange, and they turned into bullies. I mean, they were very aggressive, very just like bullies. So it makes us wonder, just because a child has an attachment bond, are there different types of attachment bonds? Are there ones that are better than others? And does this affect development of a child? And in fact, we find that it does. So very famous psychologist Mary Ainsworth did studies just in this area. And what she wanted to determine was what kind of bonds are there and how do these bonds form? So she did an experiment, and I'm going to explain the experiment to you, and then I'm going to tell you about the types of bonds that she found. She would have a mom and her child come in to be observed. And they would go into a room where there was a double glass. So Mary could see in, but the mom and the child couldn't see out. And so Mary would be observing this mom and child interaction. And she'd watch them play for about 5 minutes. And then the mom would be instructed to leave the room. So Mary watched, how does the baby react when mom leaves the room? And then mom comes back. And how does the baby react when mom comes back? Right? So she did this with a whole bunch of moms and their babies. And what she found was that 30% of children show an insecure attachment. Insecure, that's not a good word, right? That's not a good word. That doesn't mean trust. That means unsure. Unsure. And these children, well, they cling to their mothers or caregivers, and they're less likely to explore their environment. This should sound very much like separation anxiety to you. And remember what I told you about separation anxiety. It's about trust. So if you have a child who does not trust their caregiver, they could form an insecure attachment. Now, there's two types of insecure attachment. The first type, anxious ambivalent. Now, that word ambivalent means I can't really decide. Sometimes I feel this way, sometimes I feel that way. I'm really kind of two minds about it. So what Mary saw in these babies that had an anxious ambivalent bond with their moms, mom and baby would be in the room, and mom really wouldn't be playing with baby. She would just kind of say, there's some toys, go play. Or she would try to play with the baby, but it would seem so forced, almost as if she knew someone was watching her. It wasn't natural. It wasn't something that the mom did all the time. Then mom would leave the room, and the child would freak out. The child would go to the door, would start crying, just waiting there for mom to come back. And this child could not be consoled, just terribly upset, wouldn't play with all the toys that were in the room, just cried. And then, here's the interesting part. When mom came back into the room, the child was relieved that mom was back. Oh, thank God you're back. But also angry at mom. At the same time, there's that ambivalence. I'm relieved and happy, yet I'm angry and mad. So the mom would typically pick up the child to try to soothe him or her, and the child might hit mom or push mom because, yes, I'm so happy you're back, but I'm so mad at you. I'm so relieved you're here, but don't ever leave me again. And you see this behavior from the child. Well, that's just not a good bond to have with your child. The other type of insecure bond that she saw was this avoidant bond. Now, these kids, well, they didn't really play with mom when she sat down on the ground with them. They didn't really play. And then mom left the room, and they didn't even really notice. Mom who? Who cares? And then when mom came back, again, they didn't really notice. They didn't really care. So this is almost like there's no bond there. You know, it's very avoidant. Let me stay away from mom. That's not a good bond either. So these two together make up about 30% of children. And here's an example of the monkeys when their terry cloth fake mommy was taken from them. So not even their real mommy, just the surrogate mommy who didn't give them any affection. When they were taken, the monkey would become so heartbroken and so upset. Well, how could that be? It wasn't even a great bond. But the lesson here is that even a terrible bond, even a crappy bond, is better than no bond. And where we see this with kids, a lot of times we'll hear about a child or someone will investigate and find out that a child, a 10-year-old, let's say, is living with a mom who beats him or who's a drug addict and is hurting the child or neglecting the child. So CPS gets involved, they get the police, they go to the child's house to rescue the child, to take the child out of this terrible environment. And we, the adults, think, oh, this is going to be great. But the child answers the door, and the child cries and screams and doesn't want to go, wants to stay with mom. We see that a lot. And the reason being because even a bad bond is better than no bond. All right, well, the good news is that 60% of children, more than half, have a secure attachment with their parents. And I'm going to tell you, this is very easy to do. If you're going to be a parent or you are a parent and you just do the basics, feed your child, love your child, change their diaper, I mean, just the basics of parenting, this happens. Children love to love, and they're very lovable. So, as long as you are relaxed, attentive, you fulfill their needs, you will more than likely have a secure attachment with your child. And what we saw with these kids, when mom was in the room with them, she played. When mom left, they may have gotten upset. They may not have. But they still played, and they still explored their environment. They almost got over it. And then when mom came back, they were happy to see her. So this is what you want to see when you drop your child off at daycare, right? In the morning, you want to say, okay, mommy will see you after work. I love you. And the child's like, no, don't go. All right, see you later. And then they go off and they do their day and you do your day. At the end of the day, you come back to get them and they're happy to see you. And you go home and everything is great. That's a secure attachment. That's a child that trusts that you're coming back. That's good. The other 10%, because 60 and 30 make up 90, and then you have 10% left. The other 10% is called a disorganized attachment, and that's kind of like the other category. These are kids that don't fit into any of the categories I've already discussed, but don't worry about that category. Now, what happens when circumstances prevent a child from forming attachments? What happens if they don't have anyone that can give them an attachment bond? Well, we typically see children who are withdrawn, frightened, and unable to develop speech. Now, the line between frightened and angry is very, very thin. Very thin. And I'll ask you to think about a time when you were really, really angry. You lost your temper, you lost your cool. And if you trace back, why was I so angry? What was it that made me so angry? And you dig and you dig and you dig. It's probably related to fear somewhere along the line. Parents get really angry at their kids when their kids don't follow the rules. Well, why? Is it because they're disrespectful and they don't follow the rules? Yeah, that's part of it, but the real reason is they're afraid something could happen to their child. They're afraid they could get hurt. It always goes back to fear. Well, I tell you that because it is the same thing with the child. If you have a child going to school and doesn't have a lot of friends and he doesn't have any social support network at home, is frightened, well, he'll probably get beaten up, right? He'll probably get picked on if people know he's frightened. So it's better to be angry. It's better for me to hurt you before you hurt me. So these frightened, withdrawn kids who are unable to develop speech, having learning disabilities, well, these are the bullies, right? These are the bullies because I'm going to hurt you before you can get close to me and hurt me. All right. So moving on now to parenting. There's 3 types of parenting that we talk about in psychology. 2 are not so good. 1 is real good. The first type is called authoritarian parenting. Pay attention to the spelling here because there's 2 that sound alike. So this is authoritarian. And these are, the picture shows it all. These are your dictators. They expect obedience. They want you to do what they say because I said so. They're distant, they're cold, they're not touchy-feely, they're not nurturing, they're uncommunicative, and they're unresponsive. Now, why is this bad? If they get the job done, why is this bad? Well, we just learned how important that attachment is, how important it is to have that physical touch, to have someone who's nurturing and supportive of you as you're growing up. If you have parents like this, then you're missing part of it. You're missing part of it. These are the type of parents, say you make a 90 on an exam, you worked real hard, and a 90 is an A, so good job. Well, you bring your grade home, go to show your parents, and they say, well, I guess you'll be studying even harder for the next one so you can get 100 because you missed 10 points on this one. And that's kind of cold, right? But their thinking is, they're not trying to be mean, and what they're thinking is, if I tell you you did a good job on a 90, then you might bring home an 85 next time. You might not try as hard because I already said good job. So I'll never tell you good job unless you get 100 but even then I might not even say it because you can always do better. The problem is, does that work? If you have a parent who is never satisfied with how hard you work, does it make you want to try harder? Not usually. It makes a lot of us just give up. I'm never going to make her happy. I'm never going to make him happy. So why bother? So it doesn't work the way they want it to. The second type of parenting is called permissive parenting. And this one, in a lot of ways, is even worse. The picture, again, shows it all. You have a child who is ruling the household. The child makes the decisions. There's no rules. There's no expectations. Well, if you're the kid, this sounds pretty good. So what's the problem? Well, is that how the world works? Is that reality? Is that kid gonna go to kindergarten and rule the classroom? Of course not. By the time you get to kindergarten, the schools and society is expecting that you have some basis, some foundation for what's right and what's wrong. And your parents are the ones who are supposed to give you that foundation. Schools are not supposed to teach you that. They're supposed to reinforce that. Whatever basis you have, they reinforce it. But if you have a kid who doesn't have that foundation, that basis, well, that's going to be really difficult. Really, really difficult. And this child will grow into a child who learns that he's not lovable, that no one loves him, no one cared enough to discipline him. Because truthfully, discipline, that sounds like such a bad word, right? We always think of discipline as punishment. It's not. The definition of discipline is guidance about behavior that's right and behavior that's wrong. It's guidance. It's teaching. And so a good parent disciplines their child because you're teaching them the difference between right and wrong, because you want them to be successful. Finally, the last type of parenting is authoritative. Remember, the first type was authoritarian. This one is authoritative. So try to keep the two straight, authoritative. So this type of parenting, you have parents who are easygoing. Now, I don't mean easygoing in that there's no rules, because they're also firm. Easygoing refers to their parenting style. They're not full of anxiety. They're not uptight. They're not yelling. They're pretty relaxed, and they're confident in their parenting ability. They're respectful to their children. Well, this is interesting because sometimes parents will say, oh no, my child respects me. I don't have to respect my child. I'm the authority figure here. Well, are we really talking about the same type of respect? We're not. If you respect someone or you respect something, that means you think it's valuable. You respect it. It's valuable. It's important to you. Well, why wouldn't you want your children to know that they're important to you? So to respect a child, respect a 3-year-old, a 4-year-old, well, you listen to them. I see so many parents, they'll say things like their child will show them a drawing and they'll say, oh, that's nice, dear. And they're not even looking at the drawing. Well, eventually the child's going to pick up on that. And eventually the child's going to stop showing mommy or daddy drawings. So, you play with your children. I don't mean play all day. 15 minutes. In the world of a child, that's a long time. You sit and you play for 15 minutes, and you've now just shown respect to your child. You get down on the ground with them. You get to eye level, so you're not always this big, huge, looming individual over them. Also, these type of parents have realistic expectations. Now, they're firm, they want good grades, but they're pretty realistic. If I have a child who just really struggles with science and is probably never going to make an A in science, not because they don't try, but because they just don't have the ability, do I continue to expect an A and be mad and angry if they cannot get an A? I don't know. How realistic is that? So they really try to keep a realistic perspective on things, and they get to know their kids. This is good parenting. I'm hoping that all of you have parents like this. If you do, you need to tell them good job, that they've done a really great job of parenting, that they seem to get it. All right, moving on now to adolescence. Teenagers, ooh, lots of fun. Now, adolescence is defined as the time between childhood and adulthood. You notice there's no numbers here, no age brackets. That's because it kind of changes. As time goes on, puberty levels change. And so right now, adolescence is probably defined as the time period between 13 and 18. It may even start as early as 12. Okay? And now what I find particularly scary is this slide. If you look at this chart, this is just unbelievable. So you have puberty, and you have when boys and girls are going through puberty. The average age that they're going through puberty right now is for females 11, for males 13. Now that means that they are ready to have babies, that they could be reproducing once they reach puberty. Well, that's scary to me. 11-year-old girls having babies, 13-year-old boys, that's just very scary. And what's even scarier is that when I was growing up, and it's not even that long ago, I mean, I know I'm old, but it's not that long ago, these numbers were 14 and 17. You had females reaching puberty at age 14 and males reaching puberty at age 17. So why the drop? Why the decrease? Why are females and males hitting puberty so much sooner? Well, some people speculate it's our society. It's what's going on in the media. Girls are being sexualized much earlier. Boys are as well. Other people speculate that it's the hormones that are put in our meats and our foods and, any kind of chemicals and antibiotics. We're all taking way too many antibiotics. Who knows? But it is happening, and it is scary. Very, very scary, especially to us parents that have kids. All right, so let's talk about morality. Now, morality, just like anything else in your life, changes and develops as you get older. Now, what do I mean by morality? Your morals, what are those? Well, it's your values. It's your idea of what's right and what's wrong. And where do you get your morality from? Well, hopefully your parents. That's who you're supposed to get it from. And this is how it works throughout lifetime. First of all, Kohlberg is the person associated with it. Kohlberg's theory of moral development. What we've got is the first level. It's called the pre-conventional level. And this goes up to about age 9. Now, you have 2 stages here. You have kids doing good behavior or doing bad behavior based on rewards and punishment. They won't do something that's bad because they're afraid they're going to be punished. Not because it's wrong, but because they're afraid of being punished. Everything in their world for the first 9 years or so of their life is about reward and punishment. The second level is called the conventional level. And now it changes a little bit. What you see in this stage is kids still won't do what's wrong, what's right. They're making judgments based on what they know. But now it's because they want to please. They want approval from their parents, from their teachers, from their coaches. They want to be known as a good girl or a good boy. And also, they start to learn a little bit more about authority and that society respects authority. If you look in a 5th grade classroom, 6th grade classroom, all the kids are sitting down and listening to the teacher. Sure, you have 1 or 2 who might be acting up, but for the most part, they're all sitting and doing what they're supposed to be doing. Part of that is due to the teacher, but part of that is due to, this is what kids my age do. We go to school, we sit in the classroom, we do our work. Everybody else is doing it, so I might as well too. They start to fit into society and understand that if I want to be a part of this society, then I have to do what everyone else my age is doing. And then finally, the third level is called the post-conventional level. So pre-conventional, pre means before, then you have the conventional level, and now you have the post-conventional level. Post means after. And in this level, there's 2 stages. Again, you still have right and wrong determined by society, by rules, but then people start to understand that maybe this is a dumb rule. Maybe human life is more important than this rule. Think about it. Would you break the law to save someone's life? A lot of us would, because you feel like, if I'm saving a life, that's far more important than following the rules. It's kind of like that movie John Q, if you've ever seen it with Denzel Washington. That's a moral dilemma for you. This level starts sometime in the teenage years. I can't give you a good number because everyone is different depending on their environmental issues and all of that. But usually we see this in teenage years, and then you're in this level for the rest of your life. So let's do an example. Let's review this one more time. Pre-conventional level, this is everything that I just said. Before age 9, children show morality to avoid punishment, gain reward. Conventional level, they do good behavior because it pleases others, respecting authority, and just fitting into society. And then your post-conventional level, this is when the law may conflict with basic human rights. Sometimes we think laws should change. Well, how do you change laws in our society? A lot of times you have to break them or protest them in order to get them to change. All right, so here's an example for us. In Europe, a woman was near death from a specific kind of cancer. There was one drug the doctors thought might save her. It was a form of radium that a druggist in the same town had recently discovered. The drug was expensive to make, and the druggist was charging 10 times what it cost him. He paid $200 for the radium and charged $2,000 for a small dose of the drug. The sick woman's husband, Heinz, went to everyone he knew to borrow the money, but he could only get $1,000, which was half of what the drug cost. He went to the druggist. He said, "My wife is dying. Could you please sell it to me cheaper or let me pay you later?" But the druggist said, "No, I discovered the drug and I'm going to make money from it." So Heinz got desperate and broke into the man's store to steal the drug for his wife. All right. Well, now I'm going to ask you a question about that. And I want you to think, would you have Heinz arrested? Do you think Heinz should be arrested for what he did? Now, I know a lot of you are saying no. I know you are. I just know you are. But the truth is, did Heinz break the law? Did he legally break the law? Absolutely. You can't break into someone's store, and you certainly can't steal from someone. That's against the law. If you let him get away with it, if you don't arrest him, what kind of a message do you send to your society? That it's okay to break the law as long as you have a good rule? Well, that's going to cause a whole lot of anarchy and a whole lot of chaos in your society. People will start to not follow rules, and that's just disastrous. So Heinz has to be arrested, and he should be convicted. He did break the law. But sometimes we get stuck in the emotional, moral side of it. Now, he did it for a good reason. He seems like a good person. What about the druggist? Is what the druggist did such a bad thing? Well, he does want to make money. He is a businessman. The druggist, if word gets out that he gave this drug to Heinz for less money, everybody in that community would be lining up, giving the druggist some sob story about someone dying and asking for cheaper medicine. The druggist could potentially go out of business or could get no money for what he's doing. Also, keep in mind, even though the druggist paid $200 for it, he probably spent years getting this drug to work. Years, mixing the formula, doing whatever chemists do to turn it into a drug. Now, those years that he spent, he probably wasn't getting paid. So he's charging this amount for the drug to make up for all those years he worked with no income. I mean, he earned this money. Anyway, this is what we call a moral dilemma. We could debate about it. It would be more fun if I could actually hear you talking, but since I can't, we'll skip over this. But this is just an example of a moral dilemma. If you're struggling with this, if you can kind of see both sides of it, well, that's good. You should be able to, because you should be in the post-conventional level of morality, where you sometimes look at the rules and say, I think they should be broken because human life is more important. All right, so we're back to social development again. We're going to talk about a theory that goes through your whole life. It is 8 stages. This is a big one. This is the biggest one we're going to learn. And it's really talking about personality. It's a psychosocial developmental theory, which means psychologically how you fit into society, how your personality develops. It goes through your whole lifespan. And like I said, there's 8 stages. So the person responsible for this theory is Erik Erikson. So it's Erikson's stages of psychosocial development. And now what Erikson believes, every stage in your life, you're faced with some type of conflict, some type of choice. And you have this choice to go down one path or to go down another path. And depending on which path you choose, well, that determines your personality or determines how you're going to fit into this world socially. The first couple of stages, though, are really determined by your caregiver because you're just a baby. You're not making any choices. They're making choices for you. All right, so let's start with stage 1. Now, you'll notice it says stage 1, trust versus mistrust. Well, every one of Erikson's stages has that versus in the middle. That's how you know it's Erikson's, okay? There's always that versus. All right, so stage 1, trust versus mistrust. This occurs from birth all the way up to 1 year old. So what's happening? What's the conflict? Well, before I tell you, let me ask you this. How do you know that the sun is going to shine tomorrow? How do you know there's going to be enough air to breathe tomorrow? Do you lay in bed and worry, uh-oh, tomorrow might be the day where there's no air left? No, of course you don't. Of course not. That would be silly. Because we just know, we trust that the sun is going to be there, that the air is going to be there for us to breathe. And why? Well, because that's what experience tells us. That's the way it's always been, and we have no reason to think differently. Well, it's the same thing that's happening with babies. If a child has their basic needs met, someone feeds me when I'm hungry, someone changes my diaper when I'm wet, my needs are met. Well, they start to learn that this world's a pretty good place. I get my needs met. I'm going to go down the trust path. I trust that this is always going to happen. If a child is neglected or doesn't get their needs met, or sometimes gets their needs met and sometimes does not, well, they may start to travel down the mistrust path. Because I'm not so sure about this world. I'm not so sure if I'm going to have my needs met. Okay? Stage 2, it's called autonomy versus shame and doubt. Now that word autonomy, I'm going to tell you, that is a word that you should know in college. A lot of you may not know what that word means. It's not a psychology word. That is a vocabulary word. And what it means, autonomy refers to independence, being self-sufficient, being able to do things on your own. The reason I tell you you should know that word is because when you graduate and go out into the real world and get a job, a career job, employers look for autonomy. They look for employees that are going to be autonomous. I'm going to be able to give you this project and you're going to be able to complete it to the best of your ability without a lot of feedback from me. Because I'd like you to be autonomous. I'd like you to handle it. Well, if you can't be autonomous if you don't know what it means, right? So autonomy refers to independence, being able to do things on your own. Okay, so you've got toddlers now at this stage, 1 to 2 years of age. If you don't know anything about kids, when they're toddlers, they like to do things themselves. They really do. They're not necessarily getting it right, but they like to try. And so a parent has a choice. You can either let your child try to do things on their own, or you can do everything for them. If you do everything for them, or don't ever let them try something, or always step in to fix things for them, then you could be teaching them to feel shame and to doubt their ability. And the risk is, well, they'll just stop doing things. Well, I'm not good enough to do this anyway. Might as well let mommy do it. She's going to do it anyway. So the idea is to push your kids towards autonomy. Now, what you have to keep in mind is that they may not get it right. I remember there was this time when Juliana, she was almost 2 years of age, and she was learning to put her shoes on herself. And so she did it. She put her shoes on. I was so happy that she did it. And she got them on the wrong feet. Well, no big deal to me because I'm just more excited that she was able to do it on herself. And I don't want to take away her good job by saying, oh, yeah, you did it, but you didn't do it right. Well, I take her to school that day, and at this point she was in a Montessori school, and they're very rules and structure, and it was great school. But the teacher, the minute we walked in the door, she just had to say, Juliana, your shoes are on the wrong feet. Thank goodness I was there because I was able to tell Juliana, because you could see how that would cause her to feel shame or doubt, like, oh, I better let mommy do it tomorrow, right? Well, I was able to tell Juliana, yeah, but Juliana, you did it yourself, and mommy's so proud of you, and blah, blah, blah. So if you're going to be a parent who believes in this and believes that you should be pushing autonomy and helping your kids be successful, just understand that they may not get it right, or it may take them a long, long time. And that's okay, because it's not about the end result. It's about the process. It's about them learning to become self-sufficient. All right, stage 3 is a little bit more of the same. I'm not sure why Erickson split up stage 2 and stage 3, but he did. Stage 3 is called initiative versus guilt. Now, initiative means if you're taking the initiative, you're doing things on your own, right? You're a self-starter. Guilt, well, we all know what guilt is. Now, preschoolers, 3 to 5 years of age, even more so love doing stuff for themselves. They want to do things. They want chores. They want to be able to carry in groceries for you. And as a parent, you should let them do those things. You definitely should. Again, knowing that they might not do it right, or they might not do it quickly. but it's all about them doing it and making them feel successful. If you don't, the risk is that you can make them feel bad about themselves, that they're not good enough, that they can't do things. This is a perfect time. If you have 3 to 5-year-old children, this is the perfect time to introduce chores. Now, I don't mean get them out there mowing the lawn and scrubbing the floors. That's not what I mean. But little chores, making their beds. One of Juliana's chores, maybe her only chore, is feeding the dogs. She fills up the dog's bowl every night and every morning. Now, I will tell you, most of the dog food ends up on the floor. We're working on accuracy, but she still does it, and it's her chore and she takes it very seriously. Research shows the reason kids love chores at this age, they don't love them as they get older, but at this age, because it makes them feel valuable. It makes them feel a part of the family. And everybody wants that. All right, stage 4. This one is called competence versus inferiority. Some textbooks have it as industry versus inferiority. Okay, I give you both because they're used interchangeably. Now, what competence and industry means, if you're competent, it means you're good at something. If you're competent with computers, it means you know computers real well. You're smart about them. You understand them. Industrious means the same thing. If you're industrious, well, it means you're hardworking. You know what you're doing. They're kind of the same idea. The opposite versus inferiority. Well, if you're inferior, then you don't know as much. You're not as smart. You're not as good. So elementary school kids, ages 6 through puberty. This is where we see this. And now what's happening in this stage is play now becomes serious. Before this, play was fun. Play was a good way to spend time, blah, blah, blah. Now, play is all about a winner and a loser and following the rules and being good at it. So if you've ever played board games with 6-year-olds, 7-year-olds, and you say something like, oh, we don't have to worry about the rules, well, the child usually goes crazy and says, yes, we do. We have to play by the rules. Or if you say something like, it doesn't matter who wins or loses, oh, yes, it does. It definitely does to those kids. Also, middle school kids, if you see a bunch of boys get together to play football or to play a basketball game, they never say things like, oh, let's not keep score. Let's just have fun. Don't worry about fouls. Don't worry about boundaries. All right, they don't say that. No, they talk trash. They want to win. They keep score. Because if I win at this game, then I'm competent. I'm industrious. If I don't, then I'm inferior. I have a real good example of this when this happened in my house about a year ago. Juliana was on the telephone with her dad singing Ba Ba Black Sheep. And she was getting most of the words wrong. She was just making them up. I think she got Ba Ba right. That's about it. Well, Joshua and I are listening, and Joshua is getting more and more upset. And finally, he can't take it anymore, and he says, those are not the right words. Juliana, you're singing the wrong words. And he got so upset, he started to cry. I mean, I had to physically remove him from the room. He just couldn't handle it. And it was very much this idea. Joshua's so smart, so competent, so industrious because he knows the words to the song. He wants Juliana to be the same way. Otherwise, she's inferior. Anyway, it was very, very interesting. But this is very typical behavior. And I will tell you, some adults are still in this stage. All right, stage 5. This is where a lot of you are at this point in your life. It's called identity versus role confusion. And we're talking about adolescence. Through the teenage years all the way to their early 20s. So biggest thing that's going on in their lives, in your lives, is trying to find yourself. When you're in high school, you're trying to fit in. You're trying to decide, who are my friends? Who do I click with? Who am I? What are my likes, dislikes? What hobbies do I have? What do I think is cool? What do I like as far as fashion? Things like that. When you're in college, it's still the same idea, but now you're thinking, what are my strengths and weaknesses? What's going to be my career? Do I go to college? Do I go away to college? Do I stay home? What do I do? Now that's normal. That is what you're supposed to be doing during this age frame. If you don't, you then grow into an adult who has role confusion. You don't know what's going on in your life. You don't know who you are. So take a look at these pictures. Here we have 2 teenagers. Now, how many of your parents would allow you to express yourself in this way or some variation of this? I don't usually get too many students. I get a couple. And it's becoming more and more as time goes on. But a lot of parents are very uncomfortable with this. And the reason being is, well, this is a poor reflection on me as the parent. If I'm going to go to church on Sunday and bring my 2 kids, these 2, with me, what are people going to say about me, right? Also, parents don't agree with this. They don't think it looks good, so they don't want their children to be doing something like this. But is this really wrong? What if I told you that the guy on the left had a 4.0 and he volunteers on the weekends at the Children's Center? What if I told you that? Or the Children's Hospital? Would that change your opinion? Why do teenagers do stuff like this? Mostly for self-expression. They're trying to find themselves. That's what they're supposed to be doing, finding an identity. And what better way to discover your identity by trying out different things? In most cases, kids will experience this or something like this and then switch to something else or outgrow it or whatever. But if you get a parent who thinks that this is about me, that my child is being disobedient, disrespectful, not listening to my rules, then the parent fights with the child fights even harder to express themselves because they want to. If you have a parent who steps back and says, all right, I'll let you self-express, the relationship is a whole lot better. But the parent needs to be a parent, and they need to guide the child. So I'll give you an example. Let's say Joshua grows up and he comes to me and says, Mom, I want to get an earring, I want to dye my hair purple, and I want to get a tattoo of a peace sign on my forehead. Whoa, okay. Well, a lot of parents would respond with, hell no, not while you're living in my house, that's not going to happen, blah, 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 blah. They just immediately start yelling and completely shut down anything. Well, I'm curious to see what Joshua's thinking is, right? So I'm going to ask him, well, tell me why you want these things. And then maybe Joshua will say, well, I want an earring because everybody in school has an earring and I just think they look cool. I want purple hair because I really like the color purple. I think it looks cool. And I want a tattoo on my forehead of a peace sign because I think peace is a really important issue nowadays and I wish more people would talk about it. And if I put it on my forehead, it'll force people to really think about peace. Okay, interesting. I'm glad I asked, right? I'm glad I asked. So now that I've listened to Joshua, he probably feels like I listened. Now it's my turn. Is he going to listen to me a whole lot better? Probably, because I listened to him. And now I'm going to say, well, I'm okay with the earring. I'm okay with the purple hair. The tattoo? Well, I think we should wait on that. Mostly because I'm not sure you're going to love that tattoo 2 years from now, 3 years from now. It's permanent, and I'm not really sure you're gonna like it. However, this idea of peace, well, I think that's a great idea. And maybe we can go get you some t-shirts with peace signs on them, or maybe we could do something to get your message out there a little bit more. You can express yourself in a different way. That's that whole frontal lobe thing, right? Joshua has a plan. He has an idea. I want people to talk about peace. But his planning of it is not so good because his frontal lobe's not fully developed yet. That's where parents come in and try to guide their child. But I'm not done. I tell Joshua, if I agree to these things, if I let you have the earring and I let you have the purple hair, you have to keep a 4.0 or you have to keep your grades up. You have to continue going to church on the weekends. You have to, always have good behavior. Whatever my rules are. When you go to church with me on Sunday, I want you to take the earring out. Whatever my expectations are, I let him know. It's kind of like a deal. You get what you want, but I also get what I want because I'm teaching you that church is a respectful place. You don't always want to, show disrespect or whatever I'm teaching them. So when he turns into an adult and he has to go on a job interview, well, he's going to have already gotten the message that, okay, this might not be appropriate for a job interview. The risk of not allowing your children to express themselves is a conflictual relationship with them. You could have parents who will fight with kids and kids who will fight back because they just want to be who they are, and then the relationship is ruined. So you have to ask yourself as a parent, is it important that my children follow my rules to the T, or is it important that I have a good relationship with my child? It's a tricky thing. But all right, The next stage, stage 6, this is called intimacy versus isolation. Now, some of you may have been entered into this one already. Usually happens in young adulthood. Look at how young, 20 to 40, young. Woohoo, love that. Young adulthood, intimacy versus isolation. Well, what do you think's going on in this stage? If you said, should I get married? Should I have kids? Should I have relationships? Then you would be correct. That is the main thing that is on people's minds in their 20s, 30s, 40s. And society puts a lot of pressure on you, right? So intimacy. If you choose intimacy, that doesn't necessarily mean you're choosing marriage and a family. What that means is you're choosing to have intimate relationships. You're choosing relationships, romantic, intimate, close friends. You just like people. You like being around people. If you choose isolation, well, that means you're choosing to not be around people. You don't really enjoy relationships, you see no value in them, and you don't need them. In our society, we're very social beings. It's odd if we see someone who chooses isolation, right? We always think that's a little bit strange, a little bit weird. So intimacy is usually the path that, most people choose, but not always, not always. And again, it doesn't mean marriage and family, because that is no longer the traditional sense of intimacy. All right, stage 7. Now we get into middle adulthood. You've got your 40s to your 60-year-olds. I know a lot of you think 60 is old, but it's not. It's still considered middle adulthood. All right, this stage is called generativity versus stagnation. Now, there are two words that you probably have never used in your everyday language. Generativity. Well, that sounds like generation, right? That's how I want you to remember it. Generativity. Stagnation means standing still, not doing anything. You're stagnant, okay? Generativity refers to leaving something behind for future generations, teaching something to future generations. So you get people who are in their 40s, their 50s, their 60s. A lot of times, if they had kids, their kids are grown. They're well into their career, maybe thinking about retirement soon, and they think, okay, what have I done to make this world a better place? A lot of us had kids, and we taught everything we know to our kids, and that's our generativity. We have passed it on to the future generation. Some of us are teachers, right? We teach and we show things to future generations. If you don't care about that sort of thing, or if you do nothing, then you're on the stagnation side. One of the most amazing places where we see this exact thing happen is in the prison system. You'll have a lifelong prisoner, someone who's in for life and who's now in their 50s and their 60s. And, well, they can't very well, how are they going to get their generativity? A lot of people at this point in their life start to volunteer. They start to do things, right? If you look at your church or you look at any volunteer organizations, usually the people running those things are in their 40s, 50s, 60s. Okay, but a person in prison, well, they can't go and volunteer somewhere. They can't have kids. There's a lot of things that they can't do. So how do they fulfill this need of generativity? Well, what they'll do is they'll seek out a new prisoner, a prisoner in their 20s, someone who's just gotten in, and they'll teach them. They'll take them under their wing, they'll mentor them, and they'll say, listen, don't be like me. You cannot live your life like this. Here's what I want you to do. I want you to get your GED. I want you to turn your life around. I want you to be a good person. Whatever it is that they teach them. And that's their way of giving back. Okay? It's all downhill from here. I just want to tell you. Stage 8. This is the last stage of your life. And this is called integrity versus despair. And this is considered late adulthood, from your late 60s and beyond that. And Erickson says once you get to this stage, what you do is you look back on your life and you ask yourself, did I live a good life? Did I love people? Did people love me? Or was my life just a waste? If you can say, yes, I lived a good life, I loved people, people loved me, I did good things, then you had a life full of integrity. If you look back and you say, no, I was mean, I was selfish, I didn't care about people, I ruined lives, I hurt people, then that's a life of despair. And that just sounds terrible. You don't ever want to be on that side because it's too late at that point. You always want to be on the integrity side. All right. So that's it. That's it for Erikson's stages of psychosocial development. Remember, the main thoughts. At each stage, there's some type of conflict, and you have a choice of which path to go on. All right. Remember, if you have any questions, just write them down, and you can ask me when I see you on Thursday. All right, so just to review, stage 1, trust versus mistrust. Is my world predictable and supportive? That happens in the first year of your life. Stage 2, autonomy versus shame and doubt. Can I do things myself or must I always rely on others? Stage 3, am I a good kid? Am I a bad kid? Can I do things for myself? Can I not? Stage 4, industry or competence versus inferiority. Am I competent or am I worthless? Then, stage 5, adolescence to young adulthood, identity versus role confusion. Who am I and where am I going? Then stage 6, intimacy versus isolation. Shall I share my life with another or should I live alone? Stage 7, generativity versus stagnation or self-absorption. Will I produce something of real value and pass it on to future generations? And then late adulthood, integrity versus despair. Have I lived a full life? All right, so this is what I want to show you. On the left, over here, we have a healthy brain. This is probably what your brain looks like, what my brain looks like, hopefully. On this side, you have a person suffering from advanced Alzheimer's. You will notice that the brain literally shrinks and that the holes become bigger. Alzheimer's is an incurable, there's no cure, form of dementia. Dementia is a psychological disorder, and what it is mental deterioration. Your brain is literally falling apart, and what we see is impaired memory, impaired intellect. They lose memories, they lose processing speed. They can't think as fast anymore. They can't think as well. They make poor judgments. And a lot of times, if any of you know anyone who suffers from Alzheimer's, a lot of times we see a change in their personality and their behaviors. They get grumpy. They get irritable. They get cranky and mean. Now, how does this happen? Who gets affected? Who doesn't? Well, age is the number one factor. When you're over the age of 65, about 5 to 8% of people suffer from Alzheimer's. Once you get over the age of 75, that number jumps to 15 to 20%. And then once you're over 85, 25 to 50% of all people over 85 are suffering from Alzheimer's. So what does it look like as far as symptoms go? Well, as the disorder gets worse, as it progresses, patients become confused, they become irritable, they wander away from home. Now that may not seem like a big deal here in Texas because our weather is pretty manageable. But if you have an elderly person wandering from home in North Dakota in the middle of the winter and they get lost, they could die. They could die out in the cold. They have been known to fall into lakes. I mean, just all kinds of terrible things can happen. They become increasingly unable to take care of themselves. They forget to brush their teeth. They forget to shower. They forget to eat. They forget to clean up. So they now most likely have to have someone taking care of them. A lot of times they'll develop unintelligible speech. They lose the ability to control their bladder and bowel functioning, so they'll have to wear diapers, and someone has to change those diapers. They may not respond to spoken words. Sometimes they're just in a fog, in a daze. And when the disorder gets real bad, they no longer can recognize their spouse or their children. That's in the final stages. Alzheimer's affects short-term memory first, and then it starts to attack long-term memory. Things like your spouse and your children are in your long-term episodic memory, and it's usually one of the last ones to get attacked. So how do you prevent Alzheimer's? Can you prevent it? Can you delay it? Well, you can. The risk factors, I already told you the number one risk factor is age. As we get older, there's a lot of things that we just don't have control over anymore. Also, there's family history that's connected. If people in your family suffer from Alzheimer's, there's an increased chance that you will as well. To prevent or delay it, what we see is people who constantly are keeping their mind active, constantly doing crossword puzzles, doing mind games, reading, staying active. Well, that tends to delay Alzheimer's or prevent it altogether. Your brain is just like any other part of your body. If you go to the gym a lot and work out your biceps and they get real big and real strong, well, that's great. But if you stop going to the gym, what's eventually going to happen to your biceps? Well, they'll get smaller and they won't be as strong. It's the same thing with your brain. Typically what we see with elderly people, especially when they become sick or ill, they lay in bed all day and they watch TV. They're lonely. They're not typically reading. They're looking to be entertained because they're lonely. And they're not always watching the best educational shows, and they're watching entertainment things. And so their brain is not really, being as active as it should be. So I always tell my students, if you worry about your parents, buy them some crossword puzzles for Christmas or something and tell them, this is so you don't get Alzheimer's. Also, I think once you reach a certain age, you can go back to school for free. They don't charge you. I think when you're like in your 70s or 80s, you can go back for free. I know I will be. I'm fighting off Alzheimer's. I'm going to go take some classes. I might even have to take psychology over again. Who knows? All right, that is the end of this chapter. Again, keep your questions if you have any, and I will see you all on Thursday.